the next.
Well, I mean,
you're trying to have your cake and eat it.
No. Everywhere you can have the system. You can have a corrupt system, a corrupt structure, but you have certain elements in it. Good ones, you have good individuals, yes. You have good practices. The code of practice is fine.
Where's the racism? Give me an example of the racism you talked about.
Just last week, the chief policeman in Britain said that racism in our media is very strong and embedded. And this is proven by so many studies in Britain itself. So many universities prove that racism is there against the blacks, against Arabs, against Muslims, Islamophobia. Everything is in this media.
I think you'd have a lot of arguments on that score. Khaled Hroub, thank you very much indeed. Abdallah Schleifer, let me ask you to speak against the motion, please.
Well, actually, Khaled and Al-Jazeera are at the core of my argument. One of the reasons why NBC, which was the first satellite television with satellite television news, and then Orbit BBC, and then Al Jazeera, was so sensational, so extraordinary, and their impact was precisely because for the first time in 20 years, there was Arab television journalists doing journalism, which simply didn't exist before. You had and where did they acquire those skills? They certainly didn't acquire them from Egypt TV or Sudan TV or Syrian TV. They acquired them from the BBC, from ITN. They took lessons, to quote our topic. They took lessons from BBC, ITN, and they're extraordinary. They're great. And whatever quarrels I might have with Al Jazeera, I certainly don't quarrel with their field reporting. You know, they go out there and do stories. And there was no such thing as field reporting on Arab television, and to a certain degree there still isn't, except from Arab satellite television. So lessons were taken, and lessons still should be taken, especially when you move into print media, which is scandalous, again, except for a handful of opposition papers that are fairly recent in Cairo. Scandalous. Look, Saddam Hussein, when he gassed the Kurds, terrible. That story was broken by The Guardian and Newsweek, right? And at that time, not a single Arab newspaper reported it, because Saddam Hussein was the white knight of the Arab world fighting the Iranians. Let me give you an outrageous example. Israel is frequently described as a Western outpost in the Middle East, so they come under our topic. I mean, fair enough, it is a Western outpost in the Middle East. You know the massacre at Shatila and Sabra, the famous massacre? You know who broke the story of that massacre? 2 Israeli journalists. They're the ones who broke the story. Because this idea that reporting is one thing and editorial perspective is another. And they reported and broke the story. And the even more interesting thing is that the man who bore indirect responsibility for that massacre, if not more than indirect, in Time magazine was very important. They even were named in a big trial. But the man who was indirectly responsible for that massacre, Sharon, was censored by an Israeli court, and it was reported in the press. I don't know of a single equivalent thing in Lebanon where to this day there has never been procedural reporting on the massacre by Lebanese phalangists and other forces. So I could go on with examples, but above all, let's take this idea that the Western press uncritically supported the war in Iraq. The New York Times and the Washington Post, which are considered our 2 most prestigious papers in America, are consistently engaging in critical reporting. So many of the scandals that have happened in Iraq have been exposed by those papers. And editorially, by the way, the New York Times didn't support the war. I don't recall with the Post. But let's forget about the editorial perspective. We're talking about journalism, reporting. Critical reporting is going on. That's my case.
Abdallah Schleifer, thank you very much indeed. Do you trumpet the benefits of Western press?
Yes, I'm talking about the example.
As opposed to the Arab press?
Yes, as an ambience. As
a press that signally failed to hold the Bush administration to account over Iraq. I mean, you mentioned the New York Times. No, it took them 1.5 years to apologize for playing dead, didn't it?
I think their reporting from Iraq has been consistently critical. I'm not talking about partisan. I'm talking about being critical, which is what reporters should be, critical without being partisan. And the same with the Washington Post, to such a degree that they're constantly being denounced and on the right-wing radio shows, et cetera. And I think that's also true with New Yorker, that's also true with Time and Newsweek. Now,
they all pulled their punches. Dan Rather came out and said so, didn't he?
Well, that's Dan
Rather. And got eased out as a result of that from CBS, and got eased out of his job as a result of that.
I thought he got eased out for going along with the forgery of evidence.
Yeah, but the point...
Which, by the way, is another point.
The point is...
When there are... when there are forgeries...
As you know, they soft-pedaled, didn't they?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
But I'll tell you something. It's very interesting you mentioned Dan Rather, because when there are forgeries or falsehoods, These are incredible scandals which get written up in the American press. I have seen stories in the Arab press, interviews with me that never took place. You know, long interviews with quotes that never took place. And I have never seen scandals about people making up facts, making up names.
New York Times journalists had to resign for making up facts.
Exactly, because of the scandal.
Yeah.
And those scandals never happen in the Arab
All right.
world, but the problem is happening every day.
Okay, Abdallah Schleifer, thank you very much indeed. Let me now ask Marc Lynch to speak in favor of the motion, please.
Thanks, Tim. Khaled and Abdullah have done a very good job of framing the debate on the American side. So as the sole American on the panel, I think I'll talk about the Arab media. And I started studying the Arab media about 15 years ago, and simply looking at the difference between what we have today and what we had 15 years ago is simply breathtaking. 10 years ago, I would say, without, I think,